Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shanty. It's 2025. This is the first Shanty of the new year. I know it's been a while, but the holidays and all that jazz and ESTA, and I'm getting really tired of those four letters, ESTA. But we are back in the Shanty, and I want to talk about a subject that has recently come up and become important for us. I was talking with DeAndre Harris. A lot of you know DeAndre Harris. He's been with us before. About an incident that he had to deal with last month, and about some things I've been reading in the news and that we've all seen. A lot of violence going on right now. A lot of violence. Healthcare CEOs being shot on the street. People driving trucks through parades. Lots of violence. Why that's happening now? I'm not going to get into that, and I don't know. But clearly, violence is on the rise. So that got us talking about workplace violence and the issue of workplace violence and whether or not we were paying enough attention to workplace violence. And the fact of the matter is we are not. And that got driven home for DeAndre most assuredly last month because he had to deal with a workplace violence incident from one of our clients. So let's start with what workplace violence is. I mean, it makes sense that we all know, but let's get a legal definition. Let's go to OSHA, all right? Here's what OSHA defines workplace violence is. OSHA defines, pretty broadly, actually. OSHA defines workplace violence as an act or threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or other threatening behavior that occurs at the worksite. It ranges from threats and verbal abuse to physical assaults and even homicide. It can affect and involve employees, clients, customers, and visitors. Acts of violence are the third leading cause of fatal occupational injuries in the United States. So how many is that? Well, I found some old statistics going back to 2020 that said in 2020 there were 392 workplace fatalities that were a result of acts of violence, homicide, effectively. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 2023, which is the last year that we have statistics for, there were 5,283 fatal workplace injuries in the United States in 2023, and of those, 740 fatalities were due to violent acts. And there were some 30,000 reports of incidents of workplace violence. In fact, I read one survey that said over the last 5 years, 1 in 4 employees has witnessed an act of workplace violence. That's astounding to me. So what do we do about this? Well, there's a lot of things we can do. And I've talked on this podcast before about the mental health of your employees, which is clearly becoming more and more important, and all kinds of things like that. But what we do about it, we're going to start with the state of California, because once again, the state of California, for good or bad, and I've often said to you guys, don't do business in California unless you have to. But here, I think the state of California may have gotten it right. Not that I think we need a law, because I don't think we need a law, but they've given us some guidance that we can use everywhere else to maybe do some things so we don't end up with a law. Because starting on January 1 of this year, in the state of California, you are required to have a workplace violence policy. The statute says this: an employer shall establish, implement, and maintain an effective workplace violence prevention plan. The plan shall be in writing and shall be available and easily accessible to employees, authorized employee representatives, that's unions, and representatives of the division at all time. The division they're talking about is the California, I assume it's the FIHA, the California Civil Rights Division. The plan shall be in effect at all times and in all work areas and be specific to the hazards and corrective measures for each work area and operation. The written plan can either be standalone or be incorporated into a written injury and illness prevention program. So that's coming from the Labor Code in California. Now, the Labor Code in California, so we need a plan. what do we put in the plan? What should be in the plan? Well, California, in their infinite wisdom, has gone to the extreme about what they want in the plan, and they list 13 different things that they want in your plan. And I'm going to talk about them briefly because these are some things you might consider for your plan, even though you're not in California. And again, we're talking about California law here, but we could take a hint from this for our own workplace violence plan. You have to have the names of the persons responsible for implementing the plan, active procedures to get involvement by both employees and the union, methods the employer will use to coordinate implementation of the plan, effective procedures for the employer to accept and respond to reports of violence. That's a key one, right? Effective procedure to ensure that supervisory and non-supervisory employees comply with the plan. Discipline if you don't do what you're supposed to do. Effective procedures to communicate with employees. Effective procedures to respond to actual or potential or threatened workplace violence issues. Procedures to develop the training required by the Act. Procedures to identify and evaluate workplace hazards, procedures to correct workplace violence hazards, procedures for post-incident response and investigation, procedures to review the effectiveness of the plan, and procedures or other information required by the decision as they list rights, standards, rules, regulations. So that's a lot of stuff. Just a couple things that I want to focus on primarily for you while you're thinking about whether or not you need a workplace prevention plan. And by the way, before you say you don't, I just got done telling you about an incident that hit very close to home for our office because Deandra had to deal with a client. It was in Fruitport, Michigan. It involved the CEO of a company. I can tell you this because it's been in the news. I'm not going to tell you what company, but it involved the CEO of a company who was stabbed during a staff meeting. This isn't just somebody taking a swing or threatening somebody. This guy was stabbed during a staff meeting and ended up obviously in the hospital. Based on everything I've read, and I don't know the particulars, he seems to be doing okay now. But so we want to start with a plan. And the plan for me has to have two components. It's got to have a prevention component and a response component. All right? How big does the plan have to be? Well, if you follow the California rule, it's going to be pretty long. But you can do something simpler than that if you need to. It can be something that goes in your handbook that requires employees, that defines what workplace violence is, and that requires employees to report incidents of workplace violence, that says you will respond to those incidents and investigate them, and what the consequences are going to be. That sounds a lot like your harassment policy, doesn't it? Well, if you listen to OSHA, workplace harassment is a form of workplace violence, or can be a form of workplace violence. So it makes sense that those two policies would look alike. So what do we do with that policy? Well, a lot of people say, well, what we have to have here is we have to have a zero tolerance policy. A zero tolerance policy for workplace violence. And I agree with that. We're not going to allow people to be violent at work. But we have to discuss what zero tolerance actually means here, right? Does zero tolerance, like some people think, mean if you violate the policy, you're going to be fired? It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you make a threat. It doesn't matter if you punch somebody in the face. You're going to be fired. I'm not sure that's what you want out of a policy like this, because what we're trying to do is encourage employees to report these things as early as possible before they get out of hand. Why are we doing that? It's simple. Every time we read about an incident like this, as we go back and look at the incident, there's always something where we said, man, if I just would have paid more attention to that, maybe this wouldn't have happened. There's always clues that this sort of thing might happen. My definition of zero tolerance is if you violate the policy, you will be disciplined, not necessarily fired. Now, is a threat of violence worthy of termination? Well, that depends on the individual threat and what's going on and all of the factors surrounding it. And that's where you have to use your management muscles, right? You have to investigate and you have to decide. So be careful when you talk about zero tolerance that you don't turn people off from reporting things. We need to encourage people to report these incidents as early as possible so that we can deal with them. All right? Now, that also means that we have to have two things going. When an incident is reported, we have to have a procedure in this policy for investigating that incident and taking care of it. Here's what I like to do. I like to have what we call a response team under a policy like this. This is a little different probably than what you do with your harassment policy in that regard, but you have a response team. And on that response team is a member of higher management, is your HR department, is your safety department if you have it, is your EH&S department if you have it, one member from those things. And they're going to deal with all of these issues. Whenever a workplace violence incident comes up, it goes to the response team to make a decision about. Why? Because that creates consistency across your organization. If you got the same 2 or 3 or 4 people dealing with all of these incidents, you're going to know what you did the last time. You're also going to know when somebody has done this before and it's strike 2. And maybe on strike 2 they are going out the door. So we have a response team. And that response team is going to deal with reports of violence. Now, you can have forms for that. There's all kinds of ways you can report these things and keep records of them. The California statute actually requires you to keep a log of violent incidents, like an OSHA log for injuries and illnesses. The other thing we need a response team for is to deal with a violent incident when it occurs. All right? And that's crucial. And it's crucial because time often is of the essence. You either have somebody in your plant doing violent things that you need to deal with, or somebody who's been severely injured or injured and that they need to be dealt with. So you need a response team to deal with those things so that they can happen quickly and effectively and efficiently. So if you want to make a New Year's resolution for 2025, go take a look at your policies and see if you've got something like this in your policies. And if you don't, you should think about doing that. Go read the California statute if you want and use that as a guideline, or give us a call. We can help you put this together. I hope you have a fabulous 2025. I know it's a little late to be saying Happy New Year, but this is the first time I've talked to all of you. I hope you have a fabulous 2025, and I wish you all the best. Oh, and one more thing. Once you put this policy in place, I sincerely hope it's a policy you never have to use. See you soon.